What's that? Who there? Whoa.
Steven, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, really excited to talk to you today. So, how I like to start these shows, before we dive into your background and the process to grow the company, I'd love to just start with a snapshot of Burrow. So if you could go through kind of what's the mission, vision of the company, and how big are you today with respect to employees, revenue, or any other KPI you use to measure growth?
Yeah, for sure. So Burrow is a direct-to-consumer furniture brand. Our goal is to improve the end-to-end experience for consumers. So simplifying how they shop for furniture, delivering it to them faster in a more convenient way, improving the functionality and comfort of furniture and how they live with it, and then finally making it easier for them to move with their furniture, as people tend to do more and more frequently every single year. So what that kind of looked like with the first product that we launched in April of 2017, which was a modular sofa, was you customize it online. It gets delivered to you in about a week in compact boxes, which are easy to carry into your home. And it takes only a few minutes to set up with no tools. And because it comes in boxes, we can shave off several $100s of shipping costs and pass those savings on to consumers. So we can offer the same kind of quality as you might get at a West Elm or Crate & Barrel, but do it for a couple $100s less and in a more convenient way. And so we've since expanded from sofas into basically every major category of the home. And since launching in 2017, we've grown the business. We'll do about $50 million this year. We're pretty small team-wise. We're only about 35 people. It's clearly taken on with consumers.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's some things you guys did in the space that no one had ever done before, and I'm really excited to get into it. I think you flipped furniture really upside down. But before we kind of dissect the different pieces of the business, though, I'd love for you to just give the audience a quick run through of your background. So, as fast or as slow as you'd like, take us through your life and background leading up to coming up with Burrow.
Yeah. So I grew up in Syracuse, New York, for the most part. Also spent a couple of years in North Carolina when I was younger. Went to Cornell undergrad, rode lightweight crew there. In high school, I played a bunch of sports, but most notably, I did a lot of freestyle skiing, which I look back at now as it was a big component of, I think, my mental development, in the sense that I got comfortable with taking risks. And, if you're comfortable, spinning upside down off a 60-foot jump on skis, you don't just launch into that. You do all this preparation for it, but at some point you just have to trust yourself and just let it ride and take a chance. And so I think that's kind of how I'm sort of mentally wired, which I think always related to my role or my journey as an entrepreneur later on in life. But so went to Cornell and studied finance, graduated in 2009, worst time, I think, still to graduate from college, although now might be even worse. And it just kind of bounced around at a number of jobs. I worked in operations at a hedge fund, did strategy consulting, and then did 2 years in private equity and venture capital investing at a place called Common Fund in Connecticut prior to business school. And then went to Wharton in 2015 to start business school. And when I got there, I had to buy furniture, and it was a miserable experience. And my co-founder, Kabir, also had a miserable experience. And we were in this entrepreneurship class together and then started Burrow.
That's amazing. I'd love to get your take on the business school piece of it, because I think a lot of people in the circles that I run are kind of at that stage where they're deciding, is it worth it? Is it not worth it? Et cetera. And I know you had kind of a little bit of an entrepreneurship track. And so I'm curious, A, how you thought about the value prop given your background in all these different consulting, private equity, et cetera. And then B, did you kind of go into Wharton with a super specific focus, hey, I think I want to do entrepreneurship coming out of this, let me look for something? Or it kind of just fell into your lap and then you obviously took the opportunity to go forward with Burrow?
I didn't know what I wanted to do when I went to business school. I just knew I didn't want to be doing what I was doing. So it was kind of punt until, I have 2 years to figure it out without wasting 2 years, if that makes sense.
Definitely.
When I first graduated from undergrad, I had started this educational consulting company with a friend of mine. And we helped high school students from China, South Korea, and Vietnam come over to the United States, got them set up at private boarding schools in the US, and then would match them with tutors at the universities that they wanted to apply to. And those current students would tutor them and help them with their SAT prep and whatnot. And so that was my first experience with entrepreneurship or a small business, and I hated it. Like, I mean, number one, we were managing high school and college kids, which is not the ideal situation. But it was just like all the hardship and stuff, like where you're your own accountant, you're your own HR, your own whatever, but there was none of the upside with it. It was just a small business. So I hated that. So I thought maybe I'd want to start or join a startup coming out of business school, but I wasn't really sure, and sort of just fell into it. And once we started the company, I fell in love with the idea of and the size of the opportunity that we had in front of us and building a brand. And so we just kept making rapid, small chunks of progress to the point where we built up all this momentum and got to the end of our first year, and we were like, we should actually do this as a real business. And then things just kind of spiraled from there. But I think business school it makes so much sense for some people. Other people, I don't know that it does. Like, I've definitely advised a lot of people not to go to business school. I don't think you have to, depending on what you want to do with your life. For me, anybody who's just completely kind of like lost in terms of it's not clear exactly what they want to do next, I think it's a great place to go figure that out.
That's a good way to look at it. I'm fascinated by kind of the first few steps that founders take to go from like zero to whether it's prototype or early traction. Because I find, especially people listening to the show, right? Some are founders and they're taking tactical lessons learned, but a lot are just consumers who are interested in pulling back the curtain to some of their favorite brands. And so for you guys, when you stumbled upon this, realized, hey, buying couches sucks, we need to reinvent this process. Walk us through like the first 3 to 6 months. Like what were some of those steps you guys did? I'm sure just learning a ton along the way.
The initial steps were, it was just exactly what you just said. We had a poor experience, talked to other people. Everyone said buying furniture is awful. It's a bad experience. And so we said, okay, well, there's a good starting point. There's a problem. So let's dig in and see if there's an opportunity. If you can solve that problem, how big of a problem is it to solve? Because I think a lot of times, people are looking at something and it's such a specific small problem, or it's a problem that no one really cares about that much. And so solving it isn't a real business. And when we did research into the industry, that was when we fell in love with the opportunity because, number one, the US furniture industry is over $100 billion. So it's like right off the bat, great, big enough market. It's super fragmented. So the largest, there's literally thousands of players in the furniture space. And the largest one is Ikea. They have about 5% of the market share in the United States. I think Ikea is smaller than most people believe they are. Globally, they're much bigger than that. But like just in the US, they're only about 5% of the market. Wayfair is big, but there's all this overlap because Wayfair is technically a marketplace, right? So they're not like Ashley Furniture will double count a lot of what that Wayfair also has. So super fragmented. It was predominantly driven by retail, not e-commerce. And so that was a huge opportunity because we saw the growth of e-commerce, especially in furniture. And if you think about who these thousands of players are, yes, they're the big ones like Crate & Barrel and West Elm and Restoration Hardware and Wayfair, but it's mostly these regional mom and pop like retail stores that we all believe are not going to be around in 20 years or so. And so we saw this huge opportunity, even if you were just to sell furniture online, like that in and of itself was an opportunity. But the big challenge that every furniture company faces is shipping, the logistics problem. Like furniture is big and bulky. And so to make high quality furniture that you engineer to ship in compact boxes to save on shipping time and cost for consumers was just a concept that didn't exist. Anything that came apart and shipped in boxes was low quality, like IKEA or something else that was like a cheap Amazon kind of product. Nobody had thought to do it, with a high quality product. And that was where our innovation really came into play. And then when we did more research, we started approaching all these factories. We had this like mock-up of what the sofa was going to be, how it was going to come apart and ship in boxes. And we approached all these factories and everyone said, no, like we don't we don't make that.
And we're not doing that.
Yeah, they're like, no. And what we learned is how the furniture industry works is you go to a factory and you say, what do you make today? And they show you this like catalog or menu of things. And you can modify those things, but it's very hard to go to them with, hey, there's this brand new product that I want to invent and create. Will you prototype it with me? And they're like, well, I don't know how big you are, and like, what's your MOQ? And it just takes time to work your way up. And so we actually ended up getting super lucky. A classmate of ours from business school is from Mexico City, and her dad played golf with this guy who runs this tiny factory outside of Mexico City, makes furniture. And so we just got connected with him, and he was like, I'm retiring. My son's taking over. You guys are about the same age. You should talk to him. And so we flew down to Mexico City and talked to them. And he was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's make this new sofa. And that was how it got started. And that was like, I mean, that factory was awful. It was tiny and they were like so disorganized, but that's kind of all it took to get going.
That's awesome. A lot of the D2C startups that are, we talked to Thursday Boots. It was like kind of a similar story. Like they went down to Central America, found like a small little outfit just to get started. But that's awesome. When you think about the initial product design, so obviously the shipping was a big problem. You identified that right away. People want their couch quick. They want their furniture quickly. But you guys incorporated some other things that I would say are pretty obvious from like a millennial consumer perspective that other furniture companies just don't do. Like you made the material durable because people climb all over it, whereas these West Elm and Crate and Barrel pieces are almost like art. Like they're not really made to really enjoy, thoroughly. So those types of, and like you made it modular. I think you incorporated the charging piece in there. So like all these little things. Did you come up with those on your own? Like you and your co-founder just brainstorming in a whiteboard, or were you doing some really thorough like customer research early on with like small focus groups and getting those ideas from people? Talk about how you thought through that.
Yeah, we did. I mean, we did all the above. It kind of started with my co-founder and I taking a very like tech company approach. We have we put up all those logos on a slide of like durable, stain resistant, like all these different things, like any possible menu of things that could make sense just from what we thought we wanted out of furniture. And then we just started interviewing literally hundreds of people to understand what are their pain points. And a lot of those things came up. It was things like, oh, my dog chewed one of the legs of my sofa and ruined it. And I called up, the company I bought it from to see if they could replace it, and they wouldn't do it. Like I offered them $50 for a replacement leg, and they wouldn't do it. And we're like, okay, so we want to make this like kit of parts that people could replace if something happens. Or, it's like my dog ruins every sofa I'm on, and so, how do you make it more durable? And so it was a whole bunch of all these things, like you just talked about. Sofa blocks every outlet that it's, blocks the only outlet on the wall. How do I plug things in? Yeah. And so it's just like all these little design details that then we went out and said like, okay, how do we solve this for a sofa? And some of them, it was like for the fabric, that fabric existed. We found a supplier who had been working on innovating fabric for decades. And so they were the best ones to work with. Like, okay, so we'll use their fabric. And then foam, it was like just doing research on all these different components and pulling it all together. But then the aesthetic of the sofa needed to look familiar. Didn't want to copy someone else, but mid-century modern was clearly the most popular style for our demographic. And so it's just like pack all of those features into this one thing and then, try to sell it.
And how fast roughly was it from like, okay, we're going to do this. We found the factory in Mexico to you were shipping product? Wasn't it only like a couple of months?
It was super fast. So it was, so we started working on it in a class in the fall of 2015. And then, we're in business school, so just traveling and doing whatever. And then in the spring semester, we're like, okay, we should actually go after this and do it. We applied to Y Combinator, got in. And then that's when we found the factory was like late spring. And so then we get out in June to Y Combinator, and we're like, hey, we just found the factory. Like we're working on the design. And they're like, cool. How many sofas have you sold? And we're like, well, we haven't sold any yet. Like, we don't even have the design done. And they're like, cool. If you get to demo day at the end of August and you haven't sold any sofas, you'll raise $0. So if the goal of YC is to get through the end of this and we push you to go faster, and then so you can raise money, like you're going to fail miserably unless you start selling. We're like, well, we don't have anything to sell. And they're like, look, we all believe you that you can make this sofa. I know you haven't made it yet, but like, It's not rocket science. We trust that you'll figure it out. You guys are smart. What we don't know is that people are willing to pay you for it. So go prove that while you're also building it. So we the next time we went down to the factory, so our second visit down there, we're like, okay, in addition to making this prototype, we also need to make a full sofa, like a regular sofa. And then we'll Photoshop the seams of like how this thing is going to come apart and make a pre-order page and just start selling it. And so that's what we did. And so we started taking pre-orders in July. And at the end of July, when we started taking those orders. So literally the first prototype we made in Mexico City, I checked it on a plane and flew it to New York and then delivered it in an Uber XL to our first pre-order customer's house. And that start to finish, from when we incorporated the company to when we delivered the first sofa, was 12 weeks, which was coincidentally the same wait time that my co-founder had to wait for his sofa that he bought from West Elm.
That's amazing. Talk about an Uber coming to your house with a couch in it. That's awesome. The Y Combinator was a piece that I wanted to double click on. So I just had Mateo from 8 Sleep on. They were also a part of Y Combinator. I love the accelerator model, and I would love to get your take on, the experience. What are some of the biggest things you learned, other than, of course, go fast and pre-sell, et cetera? Just talk us through that experience and kind of the company coming out of it. How much better it was.
I love Mateo. I'm sure he had a similar experience, because we're not traditional YC companies. Like, physical product companies are not the norm, which I will say was also just fascinating at the dinners at YC. And people are like, "What are you working on?" And we're like, "We're selling sofas." And they're like, "What?" Like, I don't understand. Don't worry. Don't worry about
we have
it.
a USB port.
Yeah. So I think it was helpful because the lean startup method is preached there pretty heavily, which is counterintuitive to, I think, the East Coast branding model, where and we were working with Red Antler at the time, who heavily advised us not to pre-sell. They said, build up to this big launch, you'll get a bunch of press, and launch with this perfect product. And the YC folks were like, trust me, your product is going to suck. Like, the first one you sell, if you look back to this day, 5 years from now, the product you're selling 5 years from now will be so much better than what you're launching today. That's okay. Get it to a point that's good enough to sell to your customers, and then talk to them, get feedback from them, and then keep improving it. And that's a slower cycle for sure with a physical product, especially something like a sofa. But that's kind of what we did. We launched it, we took feedback, and your early customers really are so willing to give you feedback, right? And they know if they're pre-ordering something from a brand new company, they know it's maybe not going to be perfect. But the benefit is, if you buy it from them and it's not perfect and you give feedback, the company's probably going to send you a new one for free. And so there really is a benefit as a consumer to doing that. So that was what we did, and we just kept collecting feedback, and we've now iterated on the product several times. And in fact, last year we launched what we called when we called the sofa, it was really just the Burrow sofa. And then we changed it to be the Nomad, because we have different collections of seating now. And when we launched Nomad, or launched that same sofa as Nomad, we rolled out a dozen changes based on consumer feedback, like how high the armrest is, you can rest your head on it, the firmness of the foam, all these different things. And I think that's made all the difference. Is we just see we've made it more dummy proof for factories to produce, which is also then reduces the error rate and reduces returns and everything, all that stuff. We've just continued to improve the product, and I think that mentality all stems back from that experience in YC.
Totally. Yeah. One thing I want to hit on is this idea of early struggles. I feel like customers oftentimes have no clue. Sometimes their favorite brands in the early days, you almost went out of business or almost had a catastrophic mistake that put them under, and people usually don't know that. So I'm curious from you, do you have any of those moments that you could share that, in the early days you looked at and were like, oh, these are huge obstacles I don't think we're going to be able to overcome. And then of course, in hindsight, we're a small blip.
So one thing I will say that a lot of startups face that I don't think a lot of people realize is a lot of them almost or actually do run out of money at some point. And it's just through some miracle and perseverance that they actually pull it together. And we ran out of money a year and a half ago, before we raised our Series B, and you just stretch out paying suppliers and whatnot until you can pull the money together and raise it. So that's something we went through. And then I talked to a lot of other companies they were all like, yeah, that happens. Like we went to like, I've talked to some major companies, some that are like public today. And they're like, oh, we ran out of money 3 times and had to like stretch paying suppliers in order to survive. Like that happens. Like that's just part of the journey. But one thing that comes to mind, which was super early, and this is in the days when we were taking pre-orders. So this was fall of 2016. So we're still taking pre-orders, trying to make the first products. Like we made a batch of 15, delivered those, but then we had changed the design a little bit, and so we were trying to get all these custom parts in, these like metal and injection molded plastic parts for the assembly mechanism from China, while we're like getting all the foam and wood from Mexico and making these things. And so the team is still just Kabir and I, and we had to delay the pre-orders. And I'm getting all these emails from angry pre-order customers, and they're like, "I want to talk to your boss." And I'm like, "Just call me. Here's my cell phone number. Like, it's just 2 of us. Like, I'm in school. Like, can you talk right now?" And I'm like, "I can't because I'm going into class. But like, when I get out of class, like, I can talk to you." And then they start to realize like how small the operation is, and how I was like, "We'll do whatever we can for you, but like,
yeah,
whatever."
We got 4 hands total here. Like,
yeah, exactly. So, but the funny story was, we were preparing for this photo shoot that we had spent a lot of money on. It was to do all of the shots for our website that we were going to launch when we were like we were going to transition out of pre-orders to fully have, product in stock that when you place your order, it could be delivered to you within a week. That was part of the value proposition that we knew we needed to hit on. And to this point, we'd only had that like fake sofa on the website, which we literally photoshopped. I did it in Microsoft PowerPoint. I photoshopped it. That's what we've been taking pre-orders on. So it's like, okay, we're gonna do a real photo shoot with with an assembly GIF of how this thing goes together, whatever. So I'm down at the factory. We have the sofas made, but the custom parts hadn't arrived yet. And we said, you know what? That's okay. Like they're gonna arrive next week. We will just overnight just enough parts for the photo shoot samples, and we'll send them to New York. And then we'll some of them ourselves. We know how to put them on the sofa. And so we're like, all right, we'll just box up the actual seat modules and the arms and send them on a trailer from Mexico City to New York. And the day that the boxes were supposed to arrive to put the seats in, we get a call from our box supplier, and they're like, "Hey, we're delayed." And we're like, "Okay, how much?" Like, we talked to you 2 days ago, and you said everything was all good. So, how delayed are we? And they're like, "We're about a month behind."
What?
And well, it's like, I don't know how that's possible, but like, you have to do something. And they're like, "There's nothing we can do." So there was this box supplier that was across the street from our factory that we had turned down because they were too expensive. But I went to them and I was like, "Hey, if you can get some sample boxes made for us, we'll give you our entire business, all of our packaging." And they're like, "We'd love to, but we're having our holiday party, and every single, number one, the factory's not open. Number two, every box we have available just sitting around is being used as a giant stage. There's like a band playing."
Yeah, of course.
I was like, "What are you talking about? Like, I just needed like 20 boxes, like big boxes, like help me out here." And they're like, "There's nothing we can do." And so then I was like we couldn't miss this photo shoot. We'd spent the money on it, and like $20,000 all in for like everything we were going to do as an early stage startup is like everything. You just can't afford to redo these things. So I literally, I went on Google Maps, Googled cardboard, and had I don't speak Spanish, so I had the CEO of the factory call up every single hit that came up within like a 50-mile radius. And by the 8th one, we found one that had the right corrugate cardboard for us. They didn't have the boxes, but I was like, just send a truck there, pick up as many sheets of this cardboard as you can fit in the truck, and bring it back. And then I was like, we have a CNC router here that can fit half of the die lines of a box, like the outline of how you would cut it out. And I was like, let's make one of those out of wood, and then we will cut the boxes ourselves by hand.
It's insane.
Yeah, and so I spent the entire. I mean, first of all, the CEO's like, "Dude, you're nuts! Like, just call off the photo shoot." And I was like, "We can't. We have to do this." And so we made the 2 traces, and sure enough, like a couple hours later, the cardboard arrives, and I spent the entire night on the floor with a box cutter and all the factory workers, and I like bought them beer. So by the end of the night, we're all like hammered, just like cutting.
20 boxes.
Yeah. And cutting thick corrugate cardboard with a box
it's not
cutter,
easy.
no, you're like sawing. And so we made these really shitty looking boxes, whatever. And we finally got it done. We glued them together and we're like, all right, let's ship it out. And I really wish that the story ended there, but the factory filled out the paperwork wrong, and so they got stuck in customs.
Oh man!
So we were again going to miss the photo shoot, and so they were stuck in Laredo, Texas. And they're like, yeah, like the only way to get it there in time is to air freight it in, and that was going to cost like $12,000 or something. And we're like, we can't do that. And so after like 2 hours on the phone with the woman at FedEx, she was like, have you ever heard of hot trucking? I was like, no, I've not heard of this. It's just like, okay. So when truck drivers drive, they can only drive for so many hours straight legally, and then they have to take a break. Hot trucking is where you have teams of people that take turns driving, and they can just drive straight, like for like 20 hours straight. And so that was only like $3,000, which was still more than we could afford, but we're like, this is our best option. And so I like bribed this woman at FedEx by sending her a nice bottle of whiskey, and she pulled our boxes physically like out of the FedEx like warehouse and did like give to this hot trucking company in Texas, and they drove it to Brooklyn.
Wow.
And then the parts that we overnighted to Brooklyn or to New York got held up because there was a snowstorm and got rerouted, and they were not going to arrive till afterwards, after the photo shoot. So in order to get the custom parts in, I had to buy a personal plane ticket for the CEO to fly from Mexico City to New York.
That's insane.
And not only that, but he was so lazy that he wouldn't actually his visa. He had a Spanish passport, so his like e-visa had expired. So I had to fill out that paperwork for him because he was like, I don't know how to do it. So I like asked him for his social security number and everything, and was like,
oh man.
But we got it. It all worked out. We made it on time. But it was just like, it cannot be this hard at every step of the process.
That's crazy. Every single person listening to this who has a Burrow couch is just like sinking in a little deeper. Like, thank you so much, because that's how they got there. That's crazy. So a question around customer loyalty. Obviously, stories like that, you got customer loyalty coming out your ears. But like when I think about D2C, right? So the benefit is with either the right community build or the right paid placement, it's possible for you to convert a customer on like 30 seconds of exposure versus like in the old days, you'd have to go to the furniture store, et cetera. But to me, the flip of that is like, if I went to a furniture store, I might buy all my furniture in that 1 or 2 shots, just like, cause I don't want to go somewhere else. But in the internet land and D2C world, someone could just flip to a different competitor right away. And that sticking power is a lot harder to achieve. So when you think about that customer loyalty, right, how do you build and enforce that so people aren't, going to competitors?
That's the beauty with furniture, is that people still do like to buy most of their stuff from the same place. People in general, especially our customer. Now, there are customers out there like who buy furniture and they are mixing and matching, and they're kind of like, think of themselves as their own interior designer, which is great. That is not most people. Most people are like, I have no confidence that the sofa that I pick will match this coffee table and this rug and whatever. And so what's great about the furniture category is the more products we offer and we launch, the higher our average order value gets, the higher repeat purchase rate gets, the higher the value of repeat purchases gets. And it's exactly that, because people will see an image of ours and be like, I like everything about this look, and maybe I'll change 1 or 2 things, but in general, this is what I want my living room to look like. So I'll buy it all from you. And that's how we create loyalty with people. And if you think about it, like if you ask someone who bought furniture from, I don't know, let's call it CB2, unless they had a horrible experience, the next time they buy furniture, they're probably going to check CB2, because they're like, I just, you know what I mean? I don't want to tackle going someplace else. Yeah.
That makes sense. And when you think about kind of customer acquisition, I guess the other side of that, I love on this show double clicking into like customer acquisition strategies and different marketing tactics that have worked. And I've read a couple of blogs or interviews that you did where you talk about how it shifted over time. Can you just kind of go through your thinking around, in the different stages of the business, like what were the different channels that were working for you? Where did you see kind of, differentiated benefit?
I think like a lot of direct-to-consumer brands or just innovative product companies in general, the most important channel you have is word of mouth. and it just all stems from creating a really relatable brand, amazing customer service, um, and and a great product. I mean, that's like first and foremost, like the most important thing. If you have a great product, people will talk about it, right? And then it's just about feeding people those different talking points. Something that, and that's where a lot of D2C brands have a nice advantage, is like most of their stories pass the brunch test, where like it's actually cool to talk about it with your friends at brunch. And so if you can seed that story to them and deliver on the product and the customer service and the brand and all of that, that's like half the battle. And then everything else is just about generating awareness. I'd love to say that we're one of those companies that, like, we're not overly reliant on Facebook and Google, but we are, because they work. And it's just like it's an analytics game, and we have an in-house digital marketing team that lives and breathes this stuff. And for us, furniture is a highly considered purchase. So there's so many touches that you have to have with the customer for them to get from hearing about you to actually purchasing. So they might be hooked on that first 30-second bit, but then you have to remind them over and over again, because they are shopping at multiple places and they're thinking about it for a while. It's in a finite window, but it's like over the course of like a month or so, you have to convince them to buy. And yeah, over time, that's shifted. Podcasts have continued to grow for us as a great way to remind people that we exist. And then Facebook and Google, I mean, their platforms are just so intelligent for finding people at the right points in time in their life, to predict, that they're going to be buying furniture. I'm trying to think what else. Lately we've been getting into Pinterest and YouTube. YouTube is great. I mean, because it plugs into the Google ecosystem. So somebody who searches for a new sofa and then they're going down to some rabbit hole on YouTube, they're going to get
you hit them with the pre-roll.
Yeah, exactly. So that stuff works really well. During COVID, my God, because of all these companies are not advertising, plus everyone's just focused on their home, so they're searching for it more online. That has made for super favorable dynamics with marketing, and it's like incredibly efficient right now.
Yeah. Were there any out of the box tactics you tried? I like to ask this to founders, because usually people come up with like one or two things that's super out there that other, it's not in the traditional playbook. I know, you mentioned podcasts. You guys were really ingrained with Barstool at the beginning, and I think that was probably super successful for you. Any other like out of the box things that you tried, good or bad?
Yes. A very weird out of the box one. And on the Barstool point, we actually used to share an office with them. They still technically have 2 floors in our building. Deion Sanders and Portnoy were like in the elevator with me yesterday.
Wow.
It's
a crazy life.
Yeah. I think I bring my dog to work. I think she barked at Soldier Boy one time, which was also like kind of embarrassing, but like pretty funny. So there's all these empty retail stores in New York City. And that's a trend that's been happening since pre-COVID, right? Like rents are just so high. You see all these empty storefronts. So we had some of our advisors who also invest in real estate reach out to all these real estate landlords to say like, hey, can we occupy the window fronts of your empty retail stores just as like advertising? And we'll do it in a really unique, interesting way. It'll draw, like we'll get press for these locations. It'll draw a lot of like eyeballs on it, makes your store look nicer. And then we just like, we'll pay you 10% of your monthly rent or something like that, for, like 1% of the actual footprint. And we convinced a handful of landlords to let us do this. I had just gotten back from Harry Potter World in Florida. Yeah. And they have these like interactive window displays where like, if you have this like magic wand, you can do stuff and things move or whatever. And so we worked on this concept. We were working with Red Antler on this. And I basically was just like, okay, we have empty storefronts. I want to do like an interactive window display. We want to do something that like celebrates leisure and it like gets like people to pay attention to these window fronts. What can you come up with? And we came up with this thing called the Lords of Leisure, which are like these like Zoltaire-esque animatronic figures sitting in like their PJs in like a lounge chair or a love seat in these empty storefronts. And if you texted Burrow to like whatever phone number is written on that window, it would like light up and he would like wave his hand over a magic ball and and it would text you like your fortune. And we got a bunch of press for it. And like, did it work? I mean, who knows?
Yeah, tough to track that stuff, but
very hard to track. But we anecdotally, a lot of people were like, "That was amazing. That was how I heard about you guys." And I was just like, "Who the hell is this company that's doing this? This is really cool. I have to learn more."
yeah, that's really awesome, and super creative. So props for that one.
It's like the first thing that pops up if you Google my name. It's like this young CEO, like inspired by Harry Potter, seeks to solve like a New York City eyesore or something. It's like the weirdest thing.
Yeah, that's really funny. It's hilarious what people will the rabbit holes they go down. Like they'll see that, and then all 5 years worth of marketing and paid community building. They're like, "Oh, I've never seen this before." It doesn't make sense. When you think about the competition in the industry, so you mentioned it's super fragmented. I'd love to get your take just on what you think is to come of the furniture space over the next 3 to 5 years. Like, what are some trends you think are coming, and how are you positioning Burrow to take advantage of those?
So COVID caused one of the biggest things that could have happened, which was just an acceleration of trends that I think were already happening, but it just sped it up by 5 to 10 years, which is a shift away from traditional retail into e-commerce. And I don't think this means that there won't be showrooms and physical retail stores and furniture going forward. There will. It's a very tactile experience that people are looking for when they're shopping a lot of times. But if furniture sales were 20% online, 80% retail pre-COVID, post-COVID. I mean, right during COVID, it's like almost 100% e-com. But post-COVID, I don't know where it settles out. But even if it's like 30 to 40% e-com, we weren't going to get there for another 5 to 10 years. And then you look at like, okay, well, how do traditional furniture companies deliver stuff when you order it online? And a lot of times it's like white glove delivery where people have to come into your home. You have to take, half a day off of work to be there when it arrives. But during COVID, you don't want to have a stranger come into your home. So they drop it off at the curb and then you bring it into your home and it's big and bulky. So like we could not have been more positioned to take advantage of this current situation, which has helped us scale. But I do think that in general, this is where the industry is focused on. I mean, look at West Elm and Crate and Barrel are now each more than 50% online. And so then all these companies now have to figure out what is this challenge that I have to solve of the logistical piece of delivering furniture in an economical way to customers. Because traditionally, like you either pay extra to have it delivered to your home, or you go pick it up at the store yourself. And the expectation on the consumer side is that I don't have to pay for anything on shipping. And so then do retailers eat that cost, which is several $100s for orders that people are placing? And so you either do the Wayfair model, which is invest in so many warehouses all over the country in your own delivery network, or which is also something that a lot of like large regional players do, or you just redesign the furniture to be optimized for shipping, which is what we're doing. And so I think there's just going to be a lot more people that are going to be copying our model, or something in the middle where it's like some products that are easier to ship in boxes. They'll read it, like major companies will redesign those, and then they'll just invest in this very expensive logistics network to sell online and deliver it in person.
What do all these big brands like the West Elms, and what do they do with all this retail space? Like I imagine a lot of them are locked up in fair, like mid to long term leases. Like I don't think that commercial just goes year by year. So like, what do they do if they're seeing all that traffic shift away? What do you think they're going to do with that space?
For people like West Elm, I actually think they're fine. West Elm only has like 100 stores across the country. I think it may be 50. It's like 50 to 100. So it's not that many. They're all super productive stores, and they've been able to reopen now in the later half of the pandemic. But it's more the regional ones that just don't have an online presence. Because that was the other thing is like people like West Elm could shift their focus to e-com and actually not even see a drop off in their business overall, because e-com surged so much that they could just shift all their fulfillment centers to be focused on fulfilling e-commerce. It's the ones that just didn't have an e-com presence that were so reliant on retail, and they're the ones that are kind of screwed, because you're right, they are locked into these places, and then if they're going to have these massive showroom models that are really expensive and people don't need to see all that, you're right. I don't know what they do, but we're reading about. I mean, a lot of them started filing for bankruptcy already this year.
Yeah, it's crazy. I want to talk about just like if you were to manifest your future vision, because I think, when you started with the sofa, had a lot of success. Now, and you mentioned this earlier, you've expanded to a lot of the pieces that someone would need to fill their living room or bedroom, et cetera. So manifest 5 to 10 years out, what do you want Burrow to be when it grows up, so to speak?
Yeah, it's a great question that we spend a lot of time thinking about, and it changes, every 3 to 6 months. Not broadly. It's just there's still so much room to continue to innovate. It's amazing. Every new product that we start designing, we think, well, this will be the one where we realize it's just made this way because that's just the best way to make this thing. And then we dive into the design process and we're like, no, it's just because this was the first way that someone made it, or this is the way that they had to make it 100 years ago. And no one ever, thought to
Challenge it.
yeah, because it just takes longer. It's way more work to design it from the ground up and rethink and push back on all the challenges and the friction points. So for the next 3+ years, I think we're still just adding more and more products to our assortment that can continue to innovate for customers, and then it's scaling it and in improving that end-to-end customer experience. There's so much we can do, especially as technology continues to evolve. I mean, we're already over 80% of our traffic is on mobile. So how do we design the experience for that? How do we evolve what it means to serve customers from a customer experience perspective of answering their questions for like pre-purchase to post-purchase while it's being delivered, to how they're assembling it, to having questions afterwards, integrating that with video and text and chat and phone calls. And, there's a lot of work that can be done there to be cutting edge. And then in the long run, 5 to 10 years, we think of ourselves less as furniture designers and more as just like innovative problem solvers focused on the furniture space. And look, waste is a huge problem in furniture. And so how do you make a system that is truly sustainable? When I say sustainable, I don't mean like, of course, we use wood that is sustainably forested, and our packaging is all made with recycled cardboard and recycled paper. And there's all these different things you can do that I think like table stakes to be a more sustainable company. But figuring out that challenge of like, how do we utilize furniture that's been thrown away to turn that into the process of making new furniture without throwing it into a landfill? And that's something that I think long term down the road, we would love to tackle. We just don't have the scale yet to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. An idea that popped in my, like what I was thinking when you were saying that is, it's crazy that we're going to get to the point where it's just as easy to buy a couch as it is to like order Chipotle. And you guys are the leader in terms of like that mobile conversion. And what I was thinking was a big trend I'm seeing, especially in like things like digital art and culture, is this idea of like scarcity, where certain brands, like they only make a certain amount of something. And it's interesting because I don't think this has happened in furniture yet. And I'm curious if you've thought about this or talked about it at all, but maybe creating like drops or like really unique lines where you only make like 100 or 200, and then people, who already have a Burrow couch then also buy the second thing they might not need, but because of the scarcity. Have you thought about that at all?
I have. So I have a podcast called Business School, and Ryan Babenzien was just on, founder of Grades. And their entire business was like scaled through all these collaborations that they would do, these limited edition drops like you're talking about. And after he was on the show, he and I spent like literally an hour talking through what collaborations could be cool for Burrow and how do we create that type of like, custom design that is only like we only make 30 of them or 100 of them of certain types of chairs and sofas and whatnot. I do think that's really interesting. That's absolutely something we would consider doing. The challenge with furniture is just it's so much work goes into designing a single product.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
It's just it's a lot of work. But like the bigger we get, the more we have the ability. Like if we have our own in-house prototyping studio, because right now we just typically will go to the factory and prototype with the factory themselves, and we'll guide that process. But we're using all of their resources and machinery and everything. At some point, we'll be big enough to have all that in-house. And so making 30 samples, quote unquote, versus 2 or 5, what's the difference, right? We could do that and just like put the prototyping department to work full time to make these like limited edition lines and create that scarcity effect like you're talking about.
Yeah, that is really, really compelling. That'll be awesome when you guys get there. A question I have for you around, fundraising and investor lessons learned. So, like I mentioned, there's a good amount of people listening to this that are founders or aspiring founders, and they really do value the like tactical advice that successful founders share around the fundraising process. So, could you just talk through? You've raised a couple rounds. Like, what are some of the biggest lessons learned you took away from investor pitches, good or bad, and that you would share for an aspiring founder?
Yeah, I think the biggest lesson is actually this like misnomer when you first start that you have to have a lead investor who prices your round, and then you have all these other people that come in and follow them on. The invention of the YC safe to replace the convertible note was incredible, and like we wouldn't be here without the safe, because you, instead of going out to people, somebody who has to write this big check to start, you can just take cash from people when they're interested, and you can do small checks. And for us, like we raised a $4.3 million seed round. We call it a seed round. It was just a bunch of safe notes over the course of like a year and a half that we would raise in tranches as we hit different proof points in the journey, and that was critical to us. And I think so we knew we would need about $4 million to truly prove out our business. But there's no way we're going to raise $4 million coming out of YC. So we just raised like $1 million, $500,000 in these tranches on $500,000 to $500,000 checks. Most of them were kind of in the $10,000 to $25,000 range. So we had over 100 checks in our first round, so to speak. And it was just like, make some progress, raise a little bit of money, make some progress, raise a little bit of money. And it sucks taking that approach, but I think most founders are surprised to hear how hard it, or find out how hard it may, or maybe they're not surprised, but it's just really hard to raise money from a traditional VC. You hear about it, you read about it everywhere, but like to actually do it is it's near impossible. And so raising as you go sets you up. Like it's just this general concept of like, you don't have to solve for the rest of the company's life today. Just buy yourself more time. And then the more time you have, the more things will become clear for you and for other people who want to give you money. And you have no idea what can happen between now and 6 months from now. You could be in a much better position and make it significantly easier to raise more money.
Totally. Yeah, that radically changes the like, I need 2 million and I can't start until I can't stop till I have it. And then you go, I mean, the CEO spends 8 months trying to raise it. You're not operating the business. Yeah, it totally changed the game for sure. A question around, internally, I'm just curious, like, what do you think drives you and like gives you purpose? So obviously you're fascinated by this space and you're compelled, and you seem like a really competitive person with the skiing background, but like, what do you think is continuing to make you grind and push?
My favorite part about running this is figuring out what people want and like, and creating products that solve that, not just like core problems, but also problems that people haven't really articulated very well. These like latent needs that consumers have. And when you can deliver on that, and then getting feedback from customers when we've launched some product that hits on all these different points, like that's what keeps me going. Because people are like, I love that you thought of X, Y, Z, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, all these things. And I noticed all these things and I love it. And that's why I'm going to always buy products from you, because you've thought of all these things. And that's what makes me tick. And it's like I've gotten better at it over the last 4 years of running the company, of not only like coming up with those things, but then also like how to sell it and like market those ideas as well. And that's what like makes us stand out from everyone else in the industry. That's really fun. And doing it on a mass scale is intoxicating. Like the fact, like if you can figure something out that's like not just like dozens, but like thousands of people are like, this is so much better than anything else I've ever seen before, is an amazing feeling. Like I just had a review like right before jumping on this call. I had review of this of one of our new products that we're developing, and like it was probably not going to launch till middle of next year, but I like literally cannot wait to get this thing prototyped and launched because it's
that good.
yeah, I'm that excited to launch it. Like I cannot wait. You could build an entire business off of this thing. And it's just going to be one other product in our portfolio.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's really not unlike an artist. Like the way an artist will make something and then the person who buys their work is like, oh, I noticed that like intricate detail. Like that's what really energizes artists. And it's the same for you, right? You are essentially an artist creating these products. It's just through a different medium.
Yes, I do have to say I'm not actually like the designer designing them, and so like I laugh because I'm like that like annoying business person who's like hovering over their shoulder, like no, but just trust me, like I'm a dumb consumer myself, so like I would think it would be really cool if you did this, and I know you designed this detail, but like I don't know the difference between these two versions that you just did, but this other thing is going to make a big difference, and but that magic and pushback between like what a layman would like look at for a product and then how the actual designers envision it and turn it into reality and then prototyping and whatever. Like, yeah, it's a form of artwork. You're right.
Totally.
I'm just not necessarily the artist. I'm the person directing the artist.
Yeah. Shout out to the designers at Burrow for sure. So I have a little section in the podcast called the wellness stack. I'm personally, obsessed with wellness. I think the different components, fitness, nutrition, mindfulness, they all stack together and you get kind of compounding effects when they're all in line. So what I like to do is, go through a couple and just hear how you think about them. If you have a routine, if you have like set products and brands that you use. Before we dive into each one though, I'd love to just get your general take. Like, how do you think about wellness? Has it been, and is it a priority for your life? And just kind of give us your thoughts there.
I completely agree with you that it's a huge priority and it's so critically important. And I'm so happy also that so many people in the startup community have recognized this, especially recently, and are very comfortable having open dialogues around it, which like eating right and working out, obviously it makes you feel better, which gives you more energy and you're more alert and more on top of your game. I think that's huge. Actually, like not necessarily like drinking as much to like cope with your challenges. And like I know Matteo doesn't drink at Eat Sleep. Justin Kahn doesn't. He was one of our partners at YC. He stopped drinking for like the same reasons, just to be more alert and sharp. I stopped drinking for like a month. I actually didn't notice a huge difference, but now I started drinking a lot less than I used to, which I think is just generally probably healthier. And I try to meditate. I should do it more often. But the most important thing that I've done from a mental health perspective is I have an executive coach who works with me, and she is like such a difference maker for me in terms of like maintaining balance in my life and staying happy when dealing with all these like challenges and unknowns, like literally on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And to actually double click into the executive coach a little bit, because we don't hear that a lot on the show. And I also think I don't have one yet. I would love to have one, but just talk about like, what are some of the things that you go to her, with for, and how does she work with you?
Yeah. So I thought executive coaches like help you with your career of like, oh, like these are your strengths. So you should be approaching jobs like this. And this is how you interview and whatever. And what I actually talked to my executive coach, Jill, about, shout out to Jill Katz, is things like, hey, every Saturday, like I just need to take a day off on weekends. And on Sundays, I don't really mind doing work, but on Saturdays, I end up not doing work. And then I feel so guilty about not doing work that I end up not actually doing anything fun either. So I'll spend half an hour writing an email that should have taken me a minute. And I'll spend 3 hours sort of watching TV, sort of working on some presentation for the next week. And she's like, you're shooting yourself. Like, I should have done this. I should be doing that. And she's like, that's the most unhealthy thing. And like digging into like, okay, what are you afraid of? And I'm like, I'm afraid that if we fast forward 2 years, if Burrow isn't as successful as I want it to be, I will look back and think, oh, I could have worked more days or more hours to make it successful. And she's like, but do you actually think that that's the case? That's the difference between you being successful or not. I'm like, no, I don't actually think that is like me working on Saturdays is not going to be the difference between Burrow making it or not. it was in the early days. Don't get me wrong. Like in the first like year to 2 years of a company's life, yeah, you're just working 7 days a week, but that's just not sustainable forever. Um, so it's working through things like that. And she's like, hey, every Saturday you're not going to, and this is just a snippet of like what we talked about 2 weeks ago, but like, she's like, you're just not going to work. Like, give yourself permission to do nothing on a Saturday and see what that does for your mental health. And in the last 2 weeks, it's made a massive difference. I'm just like, I'm not as depressed by Saturday night when I realize I've like, you know what I mean? Like I just have more balance, and then I can actually do more work the other 6 days of the week.
Yeah. It's that recharge. It's like a night of sleep only recharges your battery like whatever, 70, 80%. And if you just keep drawing down off 80, eventually like you're going to have no gas left. You need those like days to go from 80 to 100 and like refill. I totally agree.
Exactly.
All right, 2 questions left for you. The first one is around exciting trends. So I find that entrepreneurs, founders, CEOs, they spend a lot of time reading and also talking to a lot of other founders in different areas. So if you were to put your customer hat on, or potentially like an angel investor hat, what are some other trends not in furniture that you're seeing or have heard of that excite you over the next like 3 to 5 years?
I think it's the way that like the technology behind how people are shopping and integrating or interacting with brands is something that I'm following. And I touched on it a little bit earlier on like the customer experience angle of how do you integrate that full experience for people from when they hear about you to then having like tailor-made messages to help you with your shopping journey. And that might connect to a showroom. It might not, it might be all online, but having it all be centered around your phone. I think that's a really fascinating trend to watch. I'm not sure how much AR will play a role in that. I know people are really excited about AR, and it's really cool to like demo the product. I don't know how many people are comfortable utilizing it. It's just like not the most intuitive thing, and I don't know that it actually helps you make decisions. But that is one trend that I think is pretty cool. The other stuff that I noticed that's like less on the consumer side, but more just like all these companies, it's more on the B2B side, but there is some consumer application of this too. But companies like Row, the banking company, and JustWorks for benefits, like they've taken these super archaic experiences and reformatted them to just be like super intuitive for people. I think it just like reduces so much friction in people's lives. And all of that, anytime you reduce friction, you don't actually like free up free time for people or make things easier. You're actually just freeing them up to do more and more things. So I'm excited to see what is the additional functionality that all of these seamless experiences unlock for companies or then consumers interacting with companies as well.
Yeah. Those are both.
I don't know if that's straightforward and that's kind of vague, but
yeah, no, it makes sense though. I think you're right about like, it's not like if somebody took 5 minutes, 2 minutes, like those extra 3 minutes, someone's just like sleeping longer. It's not like that. There's additional things that get unlocked there.
Yeah. I mean, think about email, like email replaced physical letters. You don't write the same number of letters to people. You now write 1,000 times the number of letters just on a daily basis.
Yeah, totally. All right, this is the last question, and we ask this to every guest, so I'm pumped to get your take here. So this is the Startup Manifesto. So some of these may be kind of sprinkled in your other answers, but if you had to write a Startup Manifesto with 5 of the most important key lessons or pitfalls to avoid when starting out, what would they be?
The first one is it may not even be to start the company, but it's to be realistic about what you're going to do for starting a company. And what I mean by that is if you're somebody who's talking about an idea that you're going to do, you're not actually spending your time working on it, or anything in your life really, but for startups, I think this applies. Just commit to what you're realistically going to do. And if you're going to do it, do it. And if you're not actually doing it, stop pretending like you're going to do it and just go enjoy your life or like focus on other areas of development. But just be realistic about what you will or will not do. It's sort of like another version of like be in the moment and be present, right? Of like either be in the meeting or don't be in the meeting, watch TV or do work. Don't try to do both at the same time. But it's so true for startups. And I saw a lot of that in business school of people like talking about a company that they're starting but then they never really started the company. But like you'd see them like, you're like, oh, hey, we're all going to grab drinks at this place. And like, oh, I can't, I'm working on my startup. But it's like, are you actually working on your startup? Or are you just like kind of like dicking around on the internet? So that's one. Two is, I think, going to be the most common one ever, which is just persevere. You're going to hear no's from so many people, and it's not just investors, but like there's this weird phenomenon where like sometimes even your friends people don't really want to see you succeed more than themselves, right? They want you.
It's weird.
Yeah, they want you to be like as successful as them if they like you, and less successful than them if they don't like you, but never more successful than them. And so the thought of you starting a company that could be really big, they just naturally are going to kind of mentally shut it down. And so even the people that are close to you, like your family members, your closest friends, they may not believe in what you're doing. And that's okay if you believe in it. And then you find new people, like other founders, to bounce ideas off of. I think that's the way you have to like push through it, is find the people who will believe in you, because they will exist. And those will be the ones, and they're in the most unexpected places. They'll be the ones that give you the motivation and like the confidence to keep going. That's two. Three, I'm going to steal a couple of these from Cyrus Masumi, who founded ZocDoc, and Slava Rubin, who founded Indiegogo. They're both on our board. One is you will get advice from so many different people at the same time. It's up to you to filter the advice. And because you'll have two really, really like successful people are so opinionated, and you'll have two of them telling you the exact opposite thing. They're both have a lot of conviction in what they're saying. They cannot both be simultaneously right. You have to filter it and figure out what's right for you. And as part of that, ask them to calibrate how much they believe in what they're saying. You'd be surprised. Sometimes people sound like they are 100% sure of what they're saying. They might tell you on a scale of 1 to 10, they're like at a 2.
Yeah, they just wanted to be bold in the way they said it.
Exactly. They're like, I have no idea what the fuck I'm talking about, but this sounds good.
It's so true.
This is something I said before, but like you don't have to solve for the rest of your company's life today. Solve for the next 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is. And that includes the product. The product doesn't have to be perfect. The team doesn't have to be perfect. The team you hire from like day one doesn't necessarily have to be the team that's there leading the entire company 6 years later. Hire and build and test for the short term, and just stay nimble enough to keep making changes and improvements. Some people and products or processes will scale with the company. Some won't. That's okay. Don't worry about the future. Worry about like the near term. And I think that's important for people who kind of consider themselves perfectionists and are like, oh, but I want this to be. Don't worry about it. Like I promise you, our website and our products were dog shit in the beginning compared to what they are today. Like I would be so embarrassed selling what we used to sell the way we used to sell it today. Like
in Ubers.
yeah, not acceptable. Fighting with custom agents, not an acceptable way to like ship it in. Don't worry about it. And that's like the whole idea of like things early on don't scale, but like really embracing it for your team too. I think people always think like, oh, I want to hire like the best marketing person. Like, what stage are you at? And they're like pre-series A. And it's like, you won't be able to hire them. Even if you could convince them, you can't afford them. And then they're going to be bored out of their mind because you're just not big enough for them to like utilize their skill set.
Totally.
The last one is on this idea of balance that we talked about. And, you know, you see all these videos on LinkedIn. It's always like the Shark Tank people or like other people like that are like, starting a business is like a, 24/7 grind. And like, it's hard. If it was easy, everybody would do it. And like, you're going to be working all these hours. There's a reason why people don't see their families when they're starting a company and they're entrepreneur for like a decade. They're just doing this. It creates this perverse expectation in your own head that you have to be working 24/7. What we just talked about, this idea of balance and recharging, is so critically important. And I think that's the most destructive thing you can do to your mental health, is convince yourself that you have to be working every single hour of every single day. If you don't have any breaks, you will not make it. You will burn out and your company's not going to make it. Or maybe the company does, but you won't be a part of it. So I think like making sure you strike that balance and have that conversation too with your co-founders and your early employees. Just get that communication out there and get all on the same page about what the expectations are, because you get so much resentment if you have people who are on completely different pages from one another.
Totally. That's a great list. One of the things you said that I want to mention quickly too is around like the people who see you being successful and then they like try to suppress it. It's so true. I have this theory that, and this is how I kind of reframed my mind over the last couple of years. There's so much room for success out there that like you and every person that's your friend and even all of their friends' friends, if all of you succeed with untapped potential, there's room for that. Like if you're going to be competitive and be like mean and not supportive, like do that with the people that are strangers. I prefer not to, but do that with the people that are strangers, but like always support your friends. I don't get these people that like, they're trying to like one up their friends. Like there's so much room for potential, and it's crazy that people do that.
Yeah. I've had so many people, close friends even, who are like, I don't know if that idea will work, or here's why I don't think it will, or like, are you really working on it? Or like, even when they're like, how's your concept coming along? And I'm like, concept? Like, we're gonna do $50 million this year. This is not a concept. We're a profitable business growing over 100% every year. Like, fuck you. This is not a concept.
Yeah. People do that all the time.
How's your little hobby going? My job? Like, that's like the equivalent of saying somebody like, how's your little hobby going?
It's so true. It's so true. All right. Well, I want to get you out of here. But before I let you go, I just want to acknowledge you for a second. You know, in having this conversation, obviously I'm hosting it, but I'm also a huge fan and just learning. And I think there are two things that I took away from you that are really impressive. And hopefully, you know, when people listen back, this inspires them as well. The first is how gritty you are, like the stories you told, and just, you know, willing to roll up your sleeves, do whatever is necessary. Nothing's above you. People say they do that, but not everybody actually acts like that. And I think you do. And that's super inspiring. And the second thing is how customer obsessed you are. Again, another trope that people use, but you know, you really love the feedback from customers saying ABC, as you said, ABC, XYZ is so amazing. Those little details, like that's what drives you. And to be that customer obsessed is awesome. So I just want to say, you know, thanks again for coming on. Super inspired. I'll continue to be a huge fan of you and Burrow, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me and for those thoughts. This was a lot of fun, and I appreciate you appreciating what we're doing.
It's an appreciation fest for sure, for sure. All right, Stephen Kuhl, founder of Burrow. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.